Hello everyone, Marco here. This is going to be a presentation on some of the ideas I have around drug substance and abuse in Prince Edward Island. So it should be right around Christmas Day or on Christmas Day that I'm releasing this. So I hope everyone's had a good holiday. Mine's been a little rough today. I woke up with kind of like a stuffy nose, sore throat. So forgive me if I have to blow my nose here and there while we do this presentation, but hopefully we'll get through it without any major issues. So back to the topic. So I've been getting a little bit involved in researching and kind of figuring out what's going on with the outreach center in Prince Edward Island. That's drawing a lot of attention. And one of the main criticisms of people who are in support of the government or the outreach center has you can one that I often hear is you can't shut up down the outreach center. It does too much good. Like so, you need to propose solutions of your own, which I think is fair enough of a criticism. So before I started following this, I never got involved with harm reduction or what was going on. I knew it was a topic, but just I never said anything about it because I didn't do any reading, any research. So if you don't do any of those things, it's probably best not to get involved in public debate. But now that I have, I feel kind of comfortable in giving a framework of what proper treatment and policy should look like. Just keep in mind, I'm just barely getting started into this, so my ideas are not set in stone. I'm open to criticism. I'm open to other ideas. And I do hope people provide their criticisms and their ideas so that this plan, these ideas that I have, can change and hopefully become something that everybody can get on board with and, we can all find some compromise. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, so I thought it'd be nice to start with a little quote from Jesus here, which I think is very applicable to the situation. And the quote is, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." So, what I think Jesus is trying to say with this quote is that he knew that his preachings would be controversial. He knew that his word would be very divisive. And I believe the quote goes on saying, "I'm going to take a son, turn him against his father, take take a daughter, turn her against her mother, and your foes will be members of your own household." So even though Jesus felt that he would, essentially bring a lot of strife and upheaval to societies, he felt that the truth was that important. And I think we should all keep that in mind that I'm going to propose some ideas here. So there's basically two groups. There's the woke camp group / harm reduction, which basically seems to want to double down, bring an injection site, and I don't know what else they plan to do. Maybe safe supply down the road, whatever not. But they have one approach on how to deal with the drug problem in PEI. And then there's another group that's kind of centered on Facebook around the group, the Rio North of Houston, I believe it's fully called, which seems to advocate for a complete abstinence model and greater enforcement by the police. So those are the two main sides, and I'm thinking I'm probably disagree with both groups on some issues and whatnot. So all I ask is for people to keep an open mind, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so let's do a brief background of where we're standing at right now. So this graph I took from Government of Canada website. It seems like I took it from the health info base on opioid-related harms for December 2023. And basically, as you can see, from 2016 to 2023, they're saying that 40,642 people in Canada died from related opioid deaths. As you can see, in 2016, it seems like a slightly over 500 people died each quarter. And now we're at the point where slightly under 2,000 people are dying each quarter. So you're looking at a fourfold increase. So this thing has gotten pretty bad since the beginning of COVID. Also, another substance that doesn't get talked about in my research here, I landed on a StatsCan stat basically that's saying that for 2022, 5,273 people died from hallucinogens and unspecified drugs, which is not an inconsequential number. So it's not as bad as opioids, but it's not just opioids. There's other drugs that are killing people. So the numbers are quite staggering for Canada. Fentanyl. Okay, so this is the main drug. You probably heard about it, but in case you haven't heard about it, fentanyl is pretty much the substance that's causing the majority of overdose and overdose deaths in Canada. And so let's talk a little bit about the background on it. It's a fully synthetic drug. So from my understanding, cocaine requires like an actual plant. Not sure what the actual name of the plant is. It's a cocaine plant anyway. From my understanding, heroin requires a poppy, but with fentanyl, you can just use. I'm not sure if I can't recall, but I think I maybe even heard you can use over the counter chemicals, and basically, you can find the what you call the recipe for fentanyl online fairly easy actually, and you need basically basic chemistry. So like if you have an undergrad degree in chemistry, you can manufacture fentanyl. So it's readily available. It's extremely potent, between 20 to 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. Now, fentanyl appears to be mostly imported from China, so it arrives from China through British Columbia, uh, often by mail, I guess even through the ports. But from my understanding is, since fentanyl is so strong, in a letterhead, you can just shove a few grams of fentanyl in it, and it goes to the dealer, and then he can use that to sell it to clients. So it's very hard to track down. And the other thing is, what it's mostly used for is that it can go into other drugs, right? So since it is so strong, instead of like giving them pure heroin or whatnot, you can use a filler like coffee grounds or salt or some other things to fill out the drug, and then you put in a little bit of fentanyl in it, and it gives the same high, but it's a lot cheaper. So here are some numbers here. 1 kilogram of fentanyl can cost of upwards of $8,600 compared to $70,000 for 1 kilogram of heroin. And keep in mind that this 1 kilogram of fentanyl can net a revenue of upwards and over $1 million. So I think I was looking at a presentation from Dr. Morrison, and she cited that there was one guy that got busted in Cornwall with 1.2 kilograms of fentanyl. So that guy was going to make bank. There is serious money behind fentanyl. So just keep that in mind. That the idea that I think that you're going to prohibit or you're going to bust all the drug dealers is kind of far-fetched, because the money is just so ludicrous that I think it's impossible to stop supply. So it's probably wise to look at this issue from a demand perspective. Okay, so let's talk about the situation in PEI. So I pulled the first table here from an overview from a website on the PEI government talking about opioids in general. And as you can see, they started tracking in 2017, and the opioids overdoses in Prince Edward Island were 10. And then the most reliable date after that, 2022, it jumped to 36. So just like in Canada, you can see pretty much almost a fourfold increase going about. And then here on table 2, this was something that I guess the opposition at the last sitting of the legislature asked some questions. And the health minister provided this document, and we're looking here at overdose calls received by island emergency services. So we can see here for the year 2023 up until November, 26 calls from opioid overdoses, and then unknown suspected opioids, basically the EMS administered naloxone or Narcan, and they responded, which means it was probably opioids. So already in 2023, the year's not even over. This doesn't take into account November and December, and you're at 63 overdoses compared to 36 of 2022. So what this is saying is that the situation is getting worse, and likely will continue to get worse as the supply line, since fentanyl is imported from China to BC, as the supply lines get more established, uh, the supply is going to be made more available in Prince Edward Island, which means that most likely the situation will continue to get worse in terms of overdoses and overdose deaths in Prince Edward Island. So let's talk about the current strategy for Prince Edward Island as it stands currently. So it's mostly going to be based on a presentation that Dr. Morrison gave to the Standing Committee on Health and Social Development on October 25th, 2023. As you can see, she basically summarized it, has 3 pillars, and all 3 of these pillars are key. None of these pillars is more important than the other. They're all necessary. So prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and we'll get back to this. This is important to talk a little later on, but keep in mind, Dr. Morrison's strategy, 3 pillars. So around the harm reduction, it's a basic needle exchange program. So any addict can go to, and there's several places listed online, I think, like some pharmacies, some mental health services, but anyway, from tip to tip, they're pretty much made available. Needles, and then also made available for free or naloxone kits. For anybody that's not aware, naloxone is a drug. Basically, the way I think opioids work, and I forget exactly, but they cause your brain to basically give signals to stop breathing. So that's how it happens. You take too much of it, you basically just stop breathing. And what naloxone does is it cuts off the opioid receptors, or something to do with the receptors in your brain. So within 3 to 4 minutes of taking naloxone, it just completely reverses the effects of opioid overdose. And the good thing about naloxone is that even if you're not taking opioids, it has no negative consequences on the individual. So it's very safe, very cheap. The other harm reduction, or you could call it treatment practice, is opioid replacement therapy. So this is anybody in Prince Edward Island who is currently abusing opioids can make a call to, I don't know what it's exactly, addiction something PEI, and basically for free you can be put on this opioid replacement program, which is basically consists, from what I understand, being put on methadone, which reduces or completely eliminates the withdrawal symptoms from opioid addiction. So with methadone, you would take it once to perhaps, I think it can go up to 3 times a day, but you got to find the right dosage that makes you function. So basically, it's a replacement to opioids that's much less severe in its physical impact. So it can, and a lot of people do manage to go on about their day, to go to work, take care of themselves and their family while being on methadone. And it also, this program will also provide with something, I hope I'm saying it correctly, Suboxone is another drug. And that's basically, Suboxone completely eliminates the highs. It's like taking an opioid, but it completely eliminates the highs, so you do not get any high feelings, and it completely eliminates the withdrawal feelings. Suboxone also has the nice effect that if somehow you do slip up and you do take something like heroin, you do not get a high from it. I don't know how it works in your brain, but you suddenly take heroin, the chances that you're going to become addicted to it if you slip up are greatly reduced. So it's kind of like a miracle drug, honestly. So the way it works on this replacement therapy is, I think for like a couple of weeks, you're supposed to still attend like therapy sessions. And then you don't have to anymore, and you can still keep taking these drugs. The only thing I don't like is that, in my opinion, this opioid replacement therapy should act as a stopgap. And then eventually there should be a push to get the clients to come off it. But from my understanding, there's none of that presently in the policy, and no talk of it. So I don't know. I think that's something that could be potentially discussed. But anyway, I think this opioid replacement therapy is overall probably a good program. It's probably one of the reasons why, although overdoses are going up, that the death rate is not jumping up, not spiking up like it is in other places in Canada. So I think overall, with maybe some minor tweaks, this is overall a good program. The other strategy for Prince Edward Island is the attempt to establish an overdose prevention site. So this has been a lot in the news and whatnot. So I don't know. I'm not going to go over it right now. And then currently the strategy for PEI is to have outreach through Pierce Alliance and the Native Council. So Pierce Alliance is, I believe, given $250,000 a year when I read their annual report to basically establish at the outreach center and hand out drug paraphernalia. And yeah, there's not much to say. I mean, on their website, they've stated that they handed out for the past year something like 200, a little bit over 200,000 needles and 6,000 pipes and a whole bunch of other accessories that help people reduce the harm from taking drugs. I don't have any stats on the Native Council of PI, but apparently they've given money to go through a van and help people do the same. So that's the current strategy. There's also the provincial addictions facility. I think it's called Mount Herbert or whatnot. That's 28 beds, and from my understanding, they basically help you detox. And after the detox, they provide some treatment. It's a 28 days, which, quite frankly, is, from my reading, from my research, a little low. The effects of taking drugs for a significant amount of time, it really alters the way your brain functions. And from my understanding, it takes upwards of at least minimum, even longer, but to see significant changes to normal brain function will take minimum of 90 days. So 30 days, you're really not setting up people for long-term success. And the other thing is that there's a wait time to get in it of at least a week, often, sometimes longer. So there needs to be some work done on the treatment aspect of it, probably. But anyway, this overall, maybe I missed a few things, is the strategy that PEI has right now to tackle this opioid crisis. What are the goals with the PEI drug policy currently? So this is one thing that I think is missing. We don't, PEI doesn't really have any stated goals in mind, that especially that don't align with what the community want. So I think it's important, if we're going to provide solutions, that we clearly state what we're trying to achieve and a time frame for when we're trying to achieve it. So the main goal as it stands now seems to be to prevent overdose deaths, and that's probably the only objective that's currently stated by Prince Edward Island, and I got that from the PEI action plan to mitigate opioid overdose deaths, written in 2017. But what I don't see, and I don't see this from activists, and I don't see this from government, is there actually a goal formulated to decrease the number of people that are addicted to drugs? Like, I mean, and I guess I go back to this opioid replacement program. Like, the idea is if somebody wants to be addicted or is addicted to methadone, that there's no attempt to get them to off it. I mean, methadone is not as bad as heroin or fentanyl, but ideally you should be getting off that too. Instead, with Prince Edward Island, there doesn't seem to be a focus to get people to stop using drugs. So we should probably formulate a goal of how many people, what percentage of the population to be addicted is acceptable. Is it 0? Is it 0.1? Is it 0.5%? Is it 1%? I don't know. The other goal should be, so this is continuously, statistics and studies and anecdotal stories from people that are involved in police, that the vast majority of crime is caused by drug addiction or trying to control the drug trade and whatnot. So one of the stated goals of any drug policy should be the reduction of crime, especially around the outreach center. But again, I don't see that as stated as a goal anywhere. So if you can't even state the goal, how can you work towards it? So my framework, my proposal that I'm going to go with is, number one goal of this policy and the solutions I'm going to propose going forward will be to decrease crime in the area, around the outreach center, decrease crime overall associated with drugs, The number two stated goal will be to decrease the percentage of the population addicted to drugs. And goal number three will be to decrease overdoses, and people that die from overdose. So those will be the three goals. The formula. So in order to achieve these goals, I think it's a good idea to establish a formula or a way that we can track these goals and have a clear objective. So the first goal will be, what target of the population do we think is acceptable to have addicted to drugs? After that is established, you have to come up with the formula. Okay, so how many people in Prince Edward Island are addicted to drugs currently? And you figure that out. Then every year you add the incidence rates of new addicts. So as people mature and they get older and they cross that threshold from teenager to young adult, their chance that they become addicted to hard drugs increases. So basically, this is trying to figure out how many new drug addicts get added to the current pool of existing drug addicts every year. And then from that, we take away the number of people that successfully are treated or get rid of their addiction. So some of it, need to blow my nose. I'm really sick, man. I'm really struggling here. Okay. So, as I was saying, every year we take away the successful number of people that get treated, and some of it are going to do it by themselves. There are stories of people that get sober by themselves, that just lock themselves in a room, they detox, they do everything by themselves. And then we need to figure out how many people get cured through Mount Hubert, how many people get cured by just going to, I don't know, maybe going through peers, who knows? Maybe peers actually helps people, who knows? Or how many people get cured by seeing a therapist or psychiatrist made available from the government, either through the hospital or through some mental health department that they have available. I don't know, but we need to figure out. So what seems like the situation right now that's really scary is the incidence rate is much higher than the rate of people that are getting off drugs. So this is why people are concerned, because it's getting worse, not better. And if more people are becoming addicted to drugs than are getting cured, that means crime is going to spike. So so the situation is quite dire, shall we say. But so the goal long term to fix this is to decrease the incidence rate. So have less addicts go into the existing pool every year, increase the number of people that were successfully treated. And then if this number of successfully treated patients goes higher than the incidence rate, at least you got an end goal in mind. At least there's light at the end of the tunnel. There could potentially be a day where drug addiction is eliminated in Prince Edward Island. But as long as this number is greater than the successful treatment rate, that's not going to happen. So the other question to keep in mind is, how quickly do you want this problem solved? So the bigger the successful treatment is, higher than the incidence rate, the more quickly you're going to solve this problem. If, however, the successful treatment rate is only slightly higher than the incidence rate, then it's going to take longer. So the more money you pour into successful treatment, the quicker you'll be able to take care of the number of the pool right now of drug addicted individuals. So these are things to keep in mind. How much is it going to cost, and how much money are we willing to put in it to see this through? The 4 pillars approach. Okay. So as I was saying earlier, Dr. Morrison only presented 3 pillars, but and this point was made by Chris Monkley, I believe. I don't know how to say his name, but I saw a post he made on the Facebook group, Real North of Houston. I didn't even know Dr. Morrison had a presentation on all this until he pointed it out. But yeah, he made the point that, the original plan was a 4-pillar approach, not a 3-pillar like was presented by Dr. Morrison. This original plan was written in Vancouver in 2001 because originally at that time they were dealing with a spike in heroin addiction. And enforcement was a key component. But now Dr. Morrison left that one out. And to tell you the truth, harm reduction activists all over Canada are leaving it out. They're not talking about enforcement at all, when the original plan did have an enforcement component to it. So I don't know why she left that out. Perhaps it's because being the chief health officer, she can only work on prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and enforcement is more the Minister of Justice and Public Safety's, Blois Thompson's sphere, so she doesn't want to get into that. That could be that. Or it could be like other harm reduction activists in Canada. They have this attitude centered around defund the police, so they don't trust the police to take care of this. This whole new mantra that's taking over, it could be that. I don't know. All I know is that enforcement used to be a key component of the action plans for how to deal with drug problems. And if you don't want it to be anymore, you should at least give a solid reason as to why enforcement should not play a key role. Okay. Enforcement presently. So let's talk about all four pillars. Enforcement is the big one that's being neglected in Prince Edward Island right now. So let's go over the situation really quickly. God damn it. Okay, criminal law is legislated by the federal branch, which is something I don't like about the Canada system. Like in the US, like each state is allowed to make their own criminal law. The fact that Prince Edward Island can't legislate its own criminal law and has to rely from the federal branch, I never had the pleasure of reading as to why, when the Canadian Constitution was being written, it was decided to do it this way. But it seems to be, to me, an inferior way of doing things. But I guess there's not much that can be done about it. But I just want to point out how that seems to be very weird. And then, the chief of police, Brad McConnell, I believe is how you say his name, he had a meeting sometime in the summer in Prince Edward Island, I guess September 6, 2023, at a town hall type meeting. And then he mentioned that the Community Outreach Center is a contributor to 32% increase in calls to police for crimes between 2018 and 2022. He called the situation around the outreach center an unpoliceable situation. And of course, many residents feel frustrated about what's going on there. Reports of harassment, indecent exposure, thefts, break-in, assaults are all on the rise. And McConnell also cited this directive for the prosecution of possession of controlled substances, 5.13, that basically said that individuals caught in the possession of drugs should not be prosecuted or whatnot, which is fine. To tell you the truth, I don't think the possession of drugs means that you should go to jail, but I do believe that you can't use your drug addiction as a get out of jail free card. If you're a drug addict and you commit other crimes like theft, breaking, entering, assault, indecent exposure, littering, all these other things, trespassing, if you commit all these other crimes, you got to get arrested and you got to face the consequences for committing those crimes. And you can't hide behind your drug addiction. Which is actually what this directive says, and I'm quoting directly from the directive. Consideration must be given as to whether the public safety concerns associated with the substance use are more readily addressed through the prosecution of other criminal activity. So there's that to keep in mind. So this drug opioid mess seems to be like a political hot potato. The police is basically blaming this directive, and McConnell was also kind of blaming the PEI government, saying that he's not in charge of housing, he's not in charge of health, all these other things that are exasperating the situation. So he's kind of passing the ball to the feds and to the province. The province is passing the ball to the federal government, saying, hey, this directive is not allowing us to do our job, blah, blah, blah. We're not receiving enough money from transfers from the federal government to do these other initiatives on health and whatnot. And then the feds are kind of going, yeah, like health is a provincial responsibility, so you need to take care of it. So we have this situation in Prince Edward Island and the rest of Canada where nobody seems to have any firm leadership of this issue. I was going to say something else, but I'm going to try and keep it civil. Yeah, nobody wants to really take charge of the situation. So realistically, who is at fault here for what's going on? And I'm going to lay the blame pretty much 90% on the King government and the provincial government. So let's go as to why. So the British North America Act, which is basically a big chunk of the Canadian Constitution, clearly states that police and security is a provincial responsibility. And then when you go to the Department of Justice and Public Safety, which Boyce Thompson is the minister, and you go on their About page, you will see this. The department coordinates efforts for efficient public safety services to provide security to citizens from threats to their personal and economic stability. So, I mean, it says it right here, you're supposed to provide security. And then when you read the Police Act, which again, Boyce Thompson is also responsible for administering, it says here that under his duties, the minister shall promote the preservation of peace, the prevention of crime, and the efficiency, adequacy, and effectiveness of police services. So, if the residents of the area around the outreach center do not feel safe, then that is your responsibility, Boyce Thompson, to bring security, peace, and prevention of crime to the area. If you're not doing anything about it, I truly believe you're in dereliction of your duty as the Minister for Justice and Public Safety and Attorney General, and there's no other way to sugarcoat it. I don't know why he's missing in action. The responses he gave during the last sitting of the legislature to questions from the opposition were just outright, bizarre to me. When he was asked one question about whether he talked to the chief of police about a policy of allowing open drug use at the outreach center, he said he never talked to the chief of police, which makes me wonder, why would you not talk about that? It seems to me that contributed significantly to the rise of crime in the area. Preventing crime is pretty much your most important responsibility, and you don't even have a talk with the chief of police about it. That's very strange. It makes me wonder, when is the last time you talked to the chief of police about security in the area? Have you ever talked to him about it? I mean, these are basic questions that I don't know if he'd be able to answer at this point. I mean, there's not enough bad things that I can say about how shocked I am about his performance on this file. It's truly, in my mind, outrageous. But anyway, let's keep going. So, enforcement solutions. So this is a quote from that 2001 report on Vancouver. And under the enforcement section, it says, addiction needs treatment, and criminal behavior needs enforcement. I'm struggling. Which is important to keep in mind. Criminal behavior needs enforcement, which is definitely the part that we're kind of missing in PEI, because the word from a lot of the residents is that drug addicts, when they commit criminal acts, they're no longer being arrested. Nothing's happening to them. They feel like it's a lawless zone. So I don't know what's going on here, but if we want to restore security to the area, the certainty of being caught is a vastly more powerful deterrent than the punishment. So this means that the certainty of being caught, all you have to do is have police kind of let the people know in the area, especially the drug addicts, that it's not open season here. That if you commit a crime, we're going to do our best to catch you and do something about it. I'm not saying that some people are saying that, you just take them and you lock them in jail for years and years or do whatever, but there has to be some type of punishment. It doesn't even have to be a big one, but you gotta set the expectation that committing crime, even if you're a drug addict, is unacceptable. So this was taken from the National Institute of Justice. They released like a little pamphlet that summarized some of the latest research on how to best deter crime. So also on that pamphlet was police deter crime by increasing the perception that criminals will be caught and punished. So again, what's shown as really effective in deterring crime, especially, is hotspot patrolling. So the outreach center is a hotspot for criminal activity right now. So increase the presence of police by patrolling. That way they act as basic sentinels, and that perception that we as a society care enough about the security of that area to have police permanently there looking out for criminal activity sends a powerful perception even of the minds of the drug addicts that, hey, these people really care about the security. I better align my values with theirs, or else there'll be consequences for me. So in another study that I didn't read fully, I just skimmed over what deters crime, Frontiers in Psychology. One of the biggest deterrents is the internalized moral system of a person. Okay, so this is why I believe also that this whole push to destigmatize and decriminalize drug addiction is not really the right way you want to go. You want to have a certain stigma. You want to have a certain judgment on drug addiction. Because if you tell drug addicts that their behavior is fine, that they're not responsible, that everything's okay, then that corrupts their internal standards. And when the internal standards completely collapse, then the deterrence of crime, it doesn't happen. So the most powerful thing, if it's a moral standard, you want to have that align with kind of like the community standards. And the more those two things align, the more harm and the more cooperation and harmony there is between the two groups. Okay, so that's something else to keep in mind. And so this whole attitude that I see perpetuating in PEI slowly to defund the police, or that the police have no role to play in drug addiction and whatnot, is a completely erroneous belief, and I don't think it's going to make things better. So this whole attitude of defund the police has to go. So how do we do practical solutions here around enforcement? Okay, so the government must make it clear that criminal activity will no longer be tolerated. So I don't know what Blois Thompson is up to, but basically, if he hasn't already, he has to have a sit down with the chief of police and figure out, okay, I want to restore law and order to the area. What is it going to take for you to get this done? He has to ask this to the chief of police. So one of the first things that should happen is should be a press conference and be made very clear that the director of prosecutions has to inform the Crown attorneys to disregard any directives that come from the feds about letting criminals go or whatnot. From now on, all the criminals, if you're caught doing criminal activity, you're going to be prosecuted. If the chief of police needs more resources and their force of police officers to patrol the area, that needs to be made available to him, and has to set the very clear expectation that going forward, crime in the area will not be tolerated. One of the things that has to be done is establishing a drug court. So in 2021, Blois Thompson was talking about establishing something like this, where basically you set up this court that instead of just sentencing criminals to jail, if you're found to be in the grips of drug addiction, there's going to be a drug rehabilitation program made available to you. So basically you catch a criminal, you go through a trial, and then at sentencing time, you give the criminal a choice. You can either serve your sentence in jail, or you can go to this rehab, and you need to take your pick right now. So I've taken these figures from the Alberta website on these drug courts, and they claim that 80% of the people that get enrolled through these drug rehabilitation programs, 80% graduate from them. And it's estimated that 70% do not reoffend again, which is very high. So honestly, these numbers look too good. So, but if that is the truth, I mean, then what Prince Edward Island should do is give Alberta a call and ask them how to set up exactly the court that they have over in Prince Edward Island. And so the severity of the addiction determines the treatment. So there's going to be some cases like the earlier you can catch this addiction, the higher the chance is to help these individuals. So there should be an early intervention that's not as severe. And then there's obviously going to be some people that are career criminals at this point that are deep in the throes of drug addiction, perhaps 5 years, using every day and committing criminal activity to fund this drug addiction every day. So stealing, breaking, and entering almost on a daily basis. They're going to need much more high intervention program. So like I said, in 2021, I saw a CBC article. Boyce Thompson was talking about it. I haven't seen anything since, so I don't know where they're at with establishing this court. They probably don't have the money to at this point. But he was talking about a therapeutic court. So again, this idea that we destigmatize drug use and instead of calling it what it is, which is a court to deal with your drug addiction, we're going to call it a therapeutic court. So I don't know, this Confucius, has a very nice saying, which basically said, if you want to get to the truth of something, you have to start calling things by their real name. So it's a drug court. Don't call it a therapeutic court. That sends the wrong message, I think. Okay, so second pillar we're going to talk about is treatment. So is addiction a disease, or is this all just semantics? So, like I said, there's this whole new push, and I see it continuously every time I read something from a harm reduction activist. It's the theme you'll see over and over again. We need to destigmatize. Don't be judgmental. Don't be judgmental. Don't be judgmental. And it's a disease. There's no moral failing. There's no moral component of it. And I kind of understand where it comes from. So in the past, I think debate was that it's a moral failing, and we kind of just like treated these addicts a little bit too harshly. So we're going to get to the prevention part later, but it seems clear research now that these addicts are suffering from a lot of trauma. A lot of them have had a bad hand in life. Just you read about some of their stories, it's truly horrible. So I do believe in a sense that we should look at it as an addiction. But I also believe that this has gone too far in destigmatizing. There needs to be, you can't look at a drug addict who's deep in the throes of drug addiction and be like, oh, it's okay, there's nothing wrong going on here. I sense the wrong message. There should be care, understanding, and compassion, while at the same time making it clear to the addict that this isn't a good path you're on. It's unlikely to end well for you. And there needs to be some kind of expectation, which requires judgment, but there needs to be an expectation that, yes, I know you've had a hard lot in life. I want to help you out with the expectation that we get you to a better place in the future. So I don't think it's just semantics. I think sometimes it is, but I think it's also important to look at it from an aspect that there needs to be a certain judgment or stigma around it. Should we accept that some, perhaps the majority of addicts will never recover? So Bonnie Henry, the chief medical officer for British Columbia, has an amazing quote saying, British Columbia, which is at the forefront of all these new harm reduction activities, has an amazing quote basically saying that we need to accept that the vast majority of these addicts were never going to recover, and so we need to provide safe supply to them, clean needles and whatnot. And again, I think that is completely the wrong attitude to take with these people. I mean, what an awful thing, I believe, to say to a drug addict that the best I can hope for you is to give you clean needles, drugs, so that you just shoot up all day and hopefully you don't cause too much crime around the area. I don't believe that. Okay? I believe that they're a person just like me, and they could be capable of doing great things. And so, which is why we need to work to get them off drugs and clean so that they can retake part in society once again. So I think this is completely the wrong attitude to take. Another thing to keep in mind, and I found this kind of shocking, but it makes sense, is the likelihood of an individual to overdose is higher after they have successfully completed a 28-day program than someone that drops out of such a program. And it makes sense, right? So this is something that I disagree with a lot of people. A lot of people are like, oh, it needs to be abstinence 100%, no pharmaceutical intervention whatsoever. And you got to keep in mind that if somebody, like I said, 28 days is not long enough, okay? Their brain has not successfully healed, so the likelihood that they're going to relapse is very high. And if you kept them completely sober off drugs, their tolerance to opioids is greatly diminished. That means that if they get out and they go back to their old dosage, the likelihood to overdose is significantly high. So this is something that drug addicts, abstinence proponents need to keep in mind, is that it's not as simple as just getting somebody cold turkey. You're dealing with some very highly addictive substance, and you're also dealing with trauma. You have to get to the underlying cause of drug addiction, which is often trauma, which is probably 28 days is not going to be enough to solve that. Residential treatment is very hit or miss. The success rate for a lot of these programs are very low. The relapse rate can be as high as between 70 to 90%. So we need to keep that in mind with treatment, that we need to do a lot of research to make sure that we get the best treatment available, because there's a lot of ideas out there, and a lot of it does not seem to work very well, if at all. So we should consider all options. Should we consider mandating drug rehab treatments? This is a situation. Some people claim that mandating treatment isn't very successful. Some people claim the studies do show that if you mandate it, it does work. I'm of the opinion right now that I would rather not mandate someone to seek treatment, but again, I'm open to other solutions going forward. But this is something to keep in mind when talking about figuring out the best treatment. I believe that there needs to be two models. There needs to be an outpatient models for the less afflicted, or people that their addiction, you caught it fairly early. Not to mention that the cost will be significantly less. And obviously there needs to be one for somebody that's taking opioids pretty much every day, unable to hold down a job, has lost contact with family or whatnot, is maybe homeless, living in a homeless shelter or whatnot, requires a much severe intervention. So inpatient treatment needs to be made available. But again, the Mount Herbert for 28 days is not going to cut it. I believe that I tried looking online for their success rate, but I couldn't find it. But if we did some Freedom of Information requests, I doubt they would even keep track of it, because it will be so bad. So we need to figure out what we're doing with that. For extreme cases, need patients to buy into treatment. Safe supply could play a role. So the biggest thing is, like I said, for drug addicts that are extreme cases, the fear of withdrawals is what keeps them using. So you got to keep in mind they're stuck in a very incredibly bad cycle, right? So most likely they have they have trauma. They're suffering a lot even before the drug addiction. Then you get the drug addiction, which makes things worse. It scrambles their brains so they can't adequately take into account the long-term consequences of their action. Probably causes them to lose their job, probably causes financial hardship, causes strains with their family. So you take their trauma, you take the additional trauma of drug addiction, and you got someone that's in a really bad place right now. So I think safe supply could play a role in that, rather than having them continuously steal or break into the neighborhood, you provide them with a safe supply that can keep them stable, at least from a while, and something you could use them to lure them into treatment, right? So you get them into treatment through safe supply, and like, hey, I'm going to give you a place to sleep, I'm going to feed you, I'm even going to give you the drugs you want. And that way, a lot of these people are, before they even get to a treatment center or emanciated, they're underfed, they're continuously strung out, not able to get a safe night's rest. So, if you get somebody into a facility through the promise of a safe supply and you potentially feed them, you get them healthy, you get them a few nights of rest, then you can maybe convince them into be like, hey, okay, I'm giving you this hard stuff. What if we tried giving you something like methadone or something else that will completely prevent your withdrawal symptoms? And basically what you want to do, in my opinion, is you should try to create a couple of hours throughout the day where their mind is somewhat lucid. And in those few hours a day, you could provide some sort of treatment to deal with their trauma or whatnot. So the way I view it is that it takes a certain amount of willpower to get off drugs, right? And their willpower is unfortunately all the way down here because they've been sleeping on the street or whatnot. Their trauma, they're beaten up. So you start working on building up their reservoir of willpower. So you do some therapy, you get them to do some other type of work that they find meaningful, and you gradually start to build up their willpower. Willpower eventually, after a few weeks, comes to here. And when their willpower surpasses the willpower it takes to get off drugs, you can try and talk them into like, hey, you know what? Why don't we go through detox? I'm still going to give you these types of drugs here to minimize the withdrawals. And then hopefully you can get them to buy into a long-term treatment plan. So that's kind of like the idea I have in my mind. I haven't been able to do a lot of research into anybody that's tried some type of approach like this, but I am convinced that somewhere in North America, there is somebody or some group or some home or some NGO that has figured out a reliable treatment for the most difficult and stubborn cases. All we need to do is scour the internet and find these people. So I could use some help with that. If anybody is interested, reach out to me. Okay. So yeah, transitional and sober house programs after successful treatment could also play a key role, or shown to increase the chances that people stay sober. As we're doing this research, we need to be very specific. How much is it going to cost to cure a person's addiction? That's a number that we need to figure out going forward. Harm reduction, okay, the other pillar. So I think that harm reduction does have a role to play, honestly. So it's important to keep in mind that no overdose deaths have occurred at an injection site, okay? So there's overdoses, obviously, but no overdose deaths. We should acknowledge that injection sites save lives and have the potential to deteriorate a community. So this is the part where I think both sides yell at each other. But yeah, like I said, like most people that are complaining about the outreach center are saying that the injections, that the community outreach center doesn't do anything. It could potentially be saving a life here and there. And, the people at the community outreach center seem to not take into account or completely disregards people concerned for safety and finding needles in the area. So both sides need to acknowledge that the other side, what they're saying is probably correct, and that they can both be true. In my opinion, harm reduction just needs to be a stopgap measure. So the idea is to cure more people from drug addiction than there are people becoming addicted to drugs every year. So there's a certain pool of islanders that are addicted to drugs right now, and it might take a while to get them into treatment. So harm reduction should just be a temporary measure until they get into treatment, which is not the view that a lot of harm reduction activists have. So like I said, Bonnie Henry, the chief medical officer for British Columbia, doesn't believe in it. She believes that harm reduction should take place throughout a person's life, right up until the point that they die of old age, which I think is wrong. There's also, I think his name is Bradley Cooper, works with the Native Council van, going around handing out needles. He also said something similar to the CBC when making a presentation to the Charlottetown City Council, that people should be, the expectation should be to provide drug addicts with these harm reduction supplies potentially for the rest of their lives, which I think is not the way to go about it. Harm reduction activists, in my opinion, should be trying to work themselves out of a job. So the idea is that, like I said, it's a temporary measure. You have to push these drug addicts into treatment. You can't, and in order to push them into treatment, you need to make a sort of judgment, and you need to put a certain stigma and let them know that, hey, what you're doing right now, I understand, man, that maybe you had it rough in life, that you weren't dealt the cards that some of the other people were dealt with, and I'm willing to provide you support. I'm willing to help you out with that. But this thing going forward, where I come around and I give you needles for the rest of your life, that's not a long-term solution to what's going on. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's an awful thing to say. Oh, I need to go back. I think that's an awful thing to say to someone, that like, I have no expectation of you. That my only expectation is that you keep taking these needles and hopefully you don't cause too much crime in the area. As Dr. Jordan Peterson pointed out, which I think he has a beautiful passage at the end of chapter 2, 12 Rules for Life, talks about people having a spark of the divine in them, and that you owe it to yourself, but also to the people around you, to your family, to the community, to do what is best for you, because you're a unique person and have the spark of the divine, and so you owe it to other people not to snuff out that light. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Yeah, okay, so the goal of harm reduction primarily is we prevent harm in the short term. An injection sites should be used as a time to basically build trust with an addict. So they come in, you provide the supplies to them, but you try and build a relationship. How are you doing? Is there any way I can help you? Here's a meal. Try and provide other services to them. And after you build enough trust with them, you can try and push them into treatment. So harm reduction, like I said, I believe there is a role for it to play. I believe it can be done right. But unfortunately, a lot of woke NGOs seem to be the ones that are pushing harm reduction. I believe they're doing it wrong. And one of the great examples of how it's being done wrong is the South Riverdale injection site. So the National Post has a great article and an interview with someone that worked there, and they called it Harm Reduction Gone Wrong. It was published on November 30th of this year. And there were some really scary stories that this person was saying about the South Riverdale. So basically saying that in the lobby, a lot of the clients would bring in items that they had stolen from nearby businesses and use it to get drugs from drug dealers that would go to this center. They were saying, I don't know, one of the big themes with a lot of these woke NGOs seems to be to hire people with peer lived-in experience. I forget what they call it, which is basically saying people that were drug addicts before, we're going to hire them. They're going to help the drug addicts now. And at the South Riverdale, apparently a lot of these people that they hired were using drugs with the clients themselves. So it wasn't past lived experience, it's current experience using drugs. And, the stories that this person was saying were literally unbelievable. And unfortunately, a lot of the stories that this individual was recounting sound a lot like the stories that are coming from the Outreach Center in conjunction with Pierce Alliance. So I don't want to repeat them because, rumors are rumors. But if even half of them are true, it doesn't look good for the Adventure Group or Pierce Alliance. So basically, the Minister of Housing, Rob Lance, has admitted in the last sitting of the legislature that the Adventure Group allowed the outreach center to be used as like an injection site, which is kind of scary because you didn't have permission to do that. Not that I know of. I mean, the community wasn't made aware of it. So that's quite a shocking admission. And I'm still shocked that there's no type of investigation done about who was responsible for making this decision or how it came about. So, basically, the Green Party and a lot of the harm activists and PEI are really concerned about getting this injection site into Charlottetown. And my rebuttal to that is that's fine. A lot of people don't trust you to run an injection site considering the mess that's been made with the outreach center. So the Green Party is all about evidence-based decision making, or so they keep saying. So now that we know that the outreach center was basically an injection site, you have all the data that you need. So I would say the best thing to do will be to have an investigation, figure out exactly what happened with Pierce, with the adventure group, figure out what the results were of having an injection site there, has some interviews with the staff and their experience, release all the incident reports that happened with the site, and let's get to the bottom of it, whether an injection site works or not. So what I am pretty sure watching this whole debacle take place is that Pierce Alliance is the wrong party to run any injection site for Prince Edward Island. So like I said, I believe in actually harm reduction, but it has to be done right. In my mind, Pierce Alliance can be nowhere near an injection site. So I did look over a government report that released the findings of the meeting that they had sometime in the summer about the injection site. And somebody did ask a question about the type of training that Pierce Alliance has. And from what I can understand, Pierce Alliance has no training in addiction services. So I go on their website and it doesn't, the people that they hired don't seem like they have any training. No meaningful training anyway. And when they were talking about training, it seemed like, again, the government report wasn't very clear, but it seemed like their training consists of something like weekend courses or whatnot. They're not hiring like real experts or professionals, which means based on their past record at the outreach center, if they were to ever be put in charge of running an injection site, in my opinion, it would be an unbelievable disaster. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Let's keep going. Prevention. Okay. The final pillar. So stress, trauma, poverty, unstable families, mental illness are all contributing factors to the likelihood of adolescent children becoming addicted to hard drugs. So like I said, trauma plays a substantial role. The teen motivations to use drugs, this was taken from a drugfree.org survey done in conjunction with another organization. I forget what it was, from the government, I think. So anyway, 32% of the respondents said they take drugs to forget their troubles, 24% because they have problems at home, and 20% because they have stress from school. And the amazing things is that when they asked the parents of these kids, why do you think is the number one reason why their children take drugs, and only 7% of them was because they believed their kids were stressed out, whereas, as you can see here, way more than half of the kids that take drugs are because they're stressed out. So there's a big disconnect between parents and their children about stress. So if I could make one tiny suggestion, is for parents, if you have kids, to really talk to your kids, figure out what's going on in their life and encourage them to be honest with you. Don't be judgmental, just listen. Because it seems like one of the reasons why adolescents are using is because they're having a hard time coping with life in general. Okay, so adverse childhood experience questionnaire, a good gauge to determine kids who are more likely to abuse substances. So this questionnaire is a 10 question. It has 10 basic questions about your childhood experiences. Yes or no, 10 questions. Each question that you answer a yes is 1 point. And basically, if I can recall the study correctly, that was done by this pediatrics. Each time you answered yes to one of these questions, it increased your likelihood to become addicted to substances by like 2 to 4%. And if you went above like 5 points, your likelihood was between like 7 to 10 times. I said percent, increases the likelihood 2 to 4 times that you're going to use drug substances. And if it's above 5, it's something like 7 to 10 times more likely that the person is going to become addicted to hard substances. So again, this reinforces the idea that a person's experience in childhood is a good gauge to determine how resilient he is and how likely he is to become addicted to drugs. So prevention, the solution. Okay. So if we know that stress or poverty are big factors to drug addiction, then we have to look at the economic conditions of Prince Edward Island. So I'm going to repeat it again. I repeat it almost every time I write an article, but I started writing in 2012, I believe, about issues on PEI, and I was doing it because I believed that PEI was really not heading in a good direction, and there was no party really talking about the issues. So the problem with Prince Edward Island, and I have repeated this so many times, but it's the government is too big, it spends too much, it taxes too much, it's too corrupt, it's involved in the lives of people far too much. And so poverty will continue to be an issue, and no party in PEI right now is going to be anywhere close to solving it. And just about every issue in Prince Edward Island is linked to poverty. It is the root cause of so many other conditions. And since I have been writing in Prince Edward Island, and I forget which article I wrote, and I said PEI will move from one crisis to another, and it will never cease because no party in PEI is dealing with the root cause. And it's unrealistic because what is the great solution from Prince Edward Island governments of how to deal with poverty? They all believe in this unrealistic idea of giving everybody a guaranteed income, which again, it's more socialism. Bigger government caused these problems, and so the solution is to spend even more money, okay? Now, if government spending actually caused prosperity, Prince Edward Island should be one of the most prosperous places in the whole world. When you take into account all the money that the federal government spends, it's unreal how much money PEI receives. And yet things are getting worse, not better. So again, I think Islanders really need to do some reflections in the mirror and realize how am I contributing to this mess? What are some of the choices that I have made in the past that have us stuck on this negative cycle that never gets better? So that's a kind of like a long-term solution, but I think that's where you need to be going to fix this issue and many other ones. Okay, the other thing is encourage drastic school reforms. Schools are akin to trauma centers. So I can already tell that's going to ruffle a lot of people's feathers, but I believe that, okay? So here is an article that I guess was published on The Guardian, and it's basically, I'm just trying to recount it. It's basically a child that I believe was 13 years old, ran away from his parents' home, and was living in a home where the individuals, I guess, were drug addicts. And the parents felt it was really unsafe for the child, and child protection services were not taking the child away from it, from that home, because I personally believe that a child, should be able to make their own decisions about where they want to live or not. And 13 years is, he's still a child, but he's not exactly, he can start making some decisions for himself at that age. But anyway, the end of the article concluded that after some going back and forth, the child did decide to go back in with his parents. And they were reporting that the child was doing a lot better and was taking time off school. So I'm going to speculate here because obviously I don't know the case, but I'm just speculating that the fact that the child was doing a lot better after not going to school leads me to believe that possibly this child was so traumatized about having to go to school that he thought it was better for him to live in a crack infested den that was unsafe because those people were not concerned whether he went to school or not. Whereas, even though the parents were providing the better environment for a home, they were most likely forcing their kid to go to school, and that was not good for him. So, that could potentially be the situation. So, I think it's important to keep that in mind, right? And I believe the child youth and advocate, I forget exactly what issue he was talking about, but he was saying the same thing, that when he had interviews with students, a lot of them were expressing the same belief that they just hated going to school. It was a deep source of stress for them. And we also had this phenomenon that wasn't occurring when I was going to school, that not in PEI and not necessarily in Canada, but in the US and I think some in Canada, where teenagers do kill themselves because they're bullied at school to such an extent. And then we also know that more of them are taking drugs, again, because of the stress, the drug-free survey. So what I think should be done to figure out what exactly how schools are contributing is maybe we might want to have a thorough survey of online and schools and try and engage what the student level of happiness is within the schools and figure out if schools are a contributing factor to this. And we also need to realize that school is not good for everyone. So we're all different, right? So this idea that we're going to line up all our children in neat little rows and desks and they're going to be learning all day. Some kids are just not built in for that. And so this idea that everybody should attend school until, like, I don't know when it's mandatory, till grade 10 or grade 12 or whatnot, maybe we need to realize that that's not healthy for everyone and have some kids just get into the trades a lot earlier. Like, just teach them their ABCs, teach them some basic maths, and then just immediately put them into a trade. Maybe that's a better way to go for it. Or like really start thinking about drastic school reforms. And I'm not going to labor these points too much. I could do a whole other presentation on this, but just very quickly, just I don't think there is a homeschooling tax credit in PI, but maybe set one up. Give parents $1,000, $2,000, maybe even higher off their taxes if they homeschool their kids. And that could potentially provide a greater incentive for kids to be healthy by learning in schools. Have community schools. I think Atlantic Canada, maybe Ontario, I forget what it was, or the only place is. There's only very few provinces in Canada that don't have community schools present. So if UPEI can get $50 million with all their scandals, why can't we have another community schools present in PEI to provide a potentially better learning environment for kids? And this is my favorite one, is just give kids vouchers. I mean, not kids, give parents vouchers. So I think I calculated that it was the school system spends $19,000 per child when they enter the school system. So instead of $19,000, perhaps give parents like a $15,000 voucher. So, so the taxpayer wins because instead of paying $19,000 to educate a child, they pay $15,000. The parent wins because they can have multiple choices in how to educate their kid. They can educate them at home. They can send them to another school. Instead of spending $15,000, maybe they can spend $10,000 and use the other $5,000 to provide a better living standard for their children. So, I think it's potentially a win-win-win. And the student will be happier because, as I said, it's likely the schools are 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 high stress sources for kids that they're not. The kids are not okay, man. The kids are not okay. So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, so that's some solutions around prevention. So how do we pay for all of it? This is the big part. I can already tell this is going to be get a lot of people upset, but let's go for it. So, like I said, this is starting to get expensive. We're potentially looking at more officers to patrol the streets. That's going to be expensive. Setting up a drug court is going to be expensive. Setting up a 90-day treatment is going to be expensive. Having an injection site is going to be expensive. It's going to take a lot of money. So how do we pay for it? So, in my opinion, since, like we already talked about, Prince Edward Islanders are some of the poorest people in Canada. They suffer from poverty. They're already some of the most taxed people in Canada. Going after more of their money by increasing taxes is a no-go there. So you could ask the federal government for more money, but like I said, they already spend disproportionate amount of money in Prince Edward Island, so I don't think that's going to be a go. Which means Prince Edward Island is going to have to find the money somewhere else from budget cuts. Okay, so I believe it's 3 billion, around 3 billion. So in a $3 billion budget with the numerous governments that Prince Edward Island has had, trust me when I tell you there's a lot of pork and a lot of easy spending cuts that you can make in there, okay? So what I have out listed here is, I believe, some of the easiest cuts that you could make that not only would they have no effect, they would have a positive effect, which means that, like, taking away money from these programs and these departments would make Prince Edward Island better off. So it's important to keep in mind that, when you're talking about cutting transfers like this, people can take it personal, because even though it's not their money, since they are receiving government money, they tend to view it as their money. You got to keep in mind that this is not their money. This is taxpayers' money, and taxpayers have a right to decide where it should be or should not be spent. So, I guess it can seem personal, but I'm proposing these cuts because I believe this money can provide way more good if it's put towards treatment, police officer, drug courts, sober living houses, okay? I believe that is going to do a lot more good than what you're currently spending the money on now. So there's nothing personal about it. Well, it's kind of personal in the way in that a lot of these cuts are going to be to woke groups, that have really acted in a nasty way towards anyone that has disagreed with them. Pierce Alliance, Transgender Network, if they have somebody in their sights, if you've criticized them in the past, they've gone after you, bullied you, said some awful things online, constantly calling people bigots and whatnot. At the Million March for Children, Lucky Fusca was going on about, put out a message to basically harass and intimidate the people that showed up at the march. They tried to dox them. Some really awful things. So, it is personal in the fact that you've made it personal. Even with me, there's numerous of these activists that support these organizations that have said awful things about me, send me personal insults, spread lies about me. So, it's not personal, but it also is kind of personal. I'm willing to forget that, though, okay? Other than that, we're all square. We're good. So anyway, let's just get to the cuts here. So like I said, Pierce Alliance, I don't know how much money they're receiving, them and the PEI, Transgender Network. If somebody could file a Freedom of Information request so that we could figure out exactly how much provincial funding they're getting, that would be good to know. In their annual report, they definitely pointed to, I believe, $250,000 for community outreach in relation to this harm prevention thing. And I believe they have 14 people on staff currently, full time. And then they have numerous part-time staff. So this is a very conservative estimate. I believe they're probably getting minimum $500,000, probably a lot more. So anyway, just cut out all of the money they're receiving. Conservative estimate $500,000. Same thing with PEI Transgender Network. The things Lucky has said online about people that disagree with them is truly horrific. I mean, I consider the PEI Transgender Network a hate group. So yeah, you can easily cut off all their funding at minimum. They're even hiring more people. So they're getting a lot of funding. Hopefully, when Pierre Poilievre becomes prime minister, he'll also be looking at defunding it from the federal side, because these people, I believe, make the island a worse place, and so they should not be getting any type of taxpayer money whatsoever. There's a new anti-racism office that was recently created. It seems like they have 2 people working and they plan on having 3 people working. Again, I'm not sure how much the whole department costs, but you can easily eliminate it. I mean, are we serious right now? I mean, Prince Edward Island, I mean, a lot of people are living in poverty, having a hard decision between figuring out whether they should heat their home or skip meals. And we're going to talk about anti-racism and anti-racism plans and whatnot. I mean, honestly, it's a joke. Just get rid of that whole department. Eliminate the Office of the Youth and Child Advocate. Now, I know people might not understand where I'm going with this, but keep in mind, this is a recent office that was added. In my opinion, it's a lot of duplication of services. Okay, we already have social housing or social care. I mean, it's departments of education and whatnot. I mean, how many more bureaucrats do you want working on the same thing? And what really scares me is that this Bernstein, Mr. Bernstein, has some quotes that are quite spectacular. So this whole office is like the pet project of Bevan Baker and the Green Party. And like, guys, I don't know, man. It's a disaster in my opinion. You go on their website and you read some of the things they say. It's just, I don't know, do it for yourself. I mean, but I propose a new rule, okay? And my rule is this. If you submit a government report, an official government report, and your first page that you present has anything to do with the idea that Prince Edward Island is Epiwick, or whatever is the native Micmac name for Prince Edward Island, and you refer to Prince Edward Island as and white people living on stolen land, unceded territory, or white people are colonials, or any of this other garbage, if you reference any of that in an official government report, you are out. Just destroy that department, raise it to the ground, take all the money that they're getting and put it into something useful. Because I don't trust anything you say after you spew any of that nonsense. Okay, so trust me when I tell you this department has 7 people. Conservatively could save at least 600,000, probably more. Okay, get rid of that whole department. It'd be a really, really nice saving. Okay, what else? Eliminate interministerial women's secretariat. So I don't know what this office does. It's under the Department of Education. Like I said, like, is Prince Edward Island really such a sexist place that we need to spend and allocate upwards of $3 million worth of grants to promote women's issue? I don't think it is. Like I said, we're having to deal with people choosing between food and heating, living on the streets. You don't have the luxury to spend over $3 million on these little pet projects. Okay, so just erase that whole department. Same thing with sports and recreation. Again, I love sports. I play sports. I'm at the gym all the time. But look, man, like, the government can't be spending money on this. Okay, people are starving. You can't do it. Same thing with culture and development. Like, just all throughout the year, reading these announcements by Dennis King. More funding for this, so this guy can write poetry. So this guy can can create a painting, so this guy can do this guy, like, come on guys, like, you don't have the money for this stuff. People are hurting out there. You can't waste your money on stuff like this. Eliminate biotech operations expense. I don't know, this was like a Department of Innovation. I saw this line and I don't even know what it means. Like, apparently they have a facility or they help finance a facility. I'm not even sure if it's just 2 or 3 little lines in the notes, so I can't tell what exactly is going on. But basically, guys, like, again, people are hurting. You can't be subsidizing businesses in this respect. You need to make it clear to this operations that these biotech companies that are benefiting from this money, that they need to take up the slack, that the government can't be financing their operations anymore, okay? Like, and maybe you don't do it all in one cut off, by the way, you phase it out over 3-5 years, but this partnership between government and business, I mean, it's a fascist idea. I mean, I believe in free markets, and we got to get subsidies to businesses have got to go, guys. It's not bueno. So anyway, I believe these are some of the easiest cuts. There's other easy cuts that you can make, but these are some of the easiest ones I found in the budget. By all means, if you don't agree with these cuts, feel free, just go in Google, type PEI budget, and find the budget, and then go through line by line, and you propose what you want to cut. But if you want treatment for Prince Edward Islanders, you can't just say, oh, you know, the government should do this, this, this. Okay, how are they going to pay for it? You need to let them know. How do you plan to pay for it? Because money doesn't grow on trees. If you want to propose how the government should spend more money, you also need to tell them, where is that money going to come from? So again, feel free to go through the budget yourself and find items that you feel comfortable cutting and propose them. So this is a hypothetical scenario of everything that could play out, okay? So Prince Edward Island currently has a population of 175,000 people. Estimated 64% are over the age of 19. That makes a pool of 112,000 people that could potentially be addicted to hard substances. This number is hard to figure out, estimating exactly what percent of those 112 could be suffering from addiction currently. I wasn't able to find a real firm figure for Prince Edward Island or Canada overall. So I'm going with 1%, but again, maybe perhaps Health PEI has this number already if we file some Freedom of Information request. But anyway, let's go with 1%. So let's estimate 1% suffer addiction that has considerable negative impacts in their life. That means that currently in PEI, 1,112 people are currently suffering from addiction. We further estimate that it takes $85,000 to run treatment for the average addiction case. This is honestly quite high. Like I said, some people, if you catch it early on, it could probably take a lot less than $85,000 if you do an outpatient program. But there's going to be some people that have been addicted for 5-10 years plus that are living on the street. They're going to take probably $120,000, maybe $150,000 to get them like a full treatment. Then with a sober living house and whatnot, could get very expensive. So let's just use an average of $85,000. So if we have 16.25 million available every year for treatment, and it takes an average of $85,000 a year to cure one person, or to actually put them through treatment, that means that we can put in Prince Edward Island 191 people through treatment every year. Now, if we assume a 50% success rate, that means that Prince Edward Island could potentially cure 95 people of their addiction per year. So if that means there's an annual pool of of a little over 1,000 people, and you can cure 100 people a year, that means that in 10 years, you could just about cure everybody that is suffering in Prince Edward Island. Now, keep in mind, there's going to be new people that become addicted, that incidence rate. So, you know, in order to keep the percentage of of people that are addicted in Prince Edward Island to an acceptable level, it's probably realistically you're looking at a 15 and 20-year period if you go with a plan like this that's very aggressive, that's willing to spend like a lot of money on it and really work on it. So that's the end of my little presentation on it, guys. These are the ideas that I have. Like I said, I'm not really set in stone on it. I'm still very early in my research, but I think this is like the bones or general structure of what kind of plan I have going forward. I'm really interested though in what the community thinks, what other people think. Like, do you think this is a good idea? Do you think it's feasible? If you do think it's feasible and you do like some of the ideas, maybe you could work with me because we could expand on this and make like a really like a 50, like 80-page report. We could research when we're talking treatment, like we could really research, okay, how much would it cost to build a facility? How much would it cost to pay the staff? Like how many like psychiatrists or addiction doctors and nurses? How many beds do you want to have? How long do you want the program to be? What kind of model is it going to be? There's like a lot of research that can be done to fill in these blanks and really make it detailed. So if you want to be part of that, you think it's a good idea or whatnot, just shoot me off an email over here or just really post below. I'm sure I'll have this on Facebook, probably Twitter, and some other groups, and then we can take it from there. If you listen to the whole presentation, thank you. I don't know how long I've been talking for. My throat is really hurting. I really want to get it over with. So I really appreciate it. And since it's the holidays, again, Merry Christmas to everyone. Hope you enjoy your holidays, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye for now.